echoes through the years. The Beaumont children case. When the trail went cold, the questions began to multiply. Who was the blond man seen on the beach that day? Why were there no traces, no ransom, no clues, nothing to explain how 3 children vanished in daylight? For days, search teams scoured the coast. For months, police followed every lead. And for years, the same questions echoed through Australia's headlines and living rooms. As the public's hope faded, obsession took its place. Letters arrived, suspects emerged, each promising an answer, each ending in disappointment. The case of the Beaumont children was no longer about finding them. It had become a search for truth itself. This is what happened next. As the investigation stretched from months into years, one truth became unavoidable. Whoever had taken the Beaumont children had done it perfectly. There were no traces, no ransom, no witnesses who could identify a vehicle or a house. The only constant was the image of the unknown blond man, a ghost at the edge of memory. Police sketches of the man were circulated across Australia. He was described as being in his mid-30s, tall and lean, with light brown or blonde hair and a calm, friendly manner. Dozens of men were questioned and many volunteered themselves to clear their names. Yet none matched. In the absence of facts, speculation began to take the place of evidence. Over time, the case accumulated a gallery of suspects, men whose names would for decades become entwined with the mystery of Glenelg Beach. He was the first and most enduring figure in the investigation, the last person seen with the children. Witnesses said he acted naturally, as though he already knew them. That was what chilled detectives most: the ease, the lack of fear, the visible trust. In later years, psychologists studying the case would suggest the man might have been seen by the children before, perhaps a neighbor, a frequent visitor to the area, or someone who had approached them on previous outings. Despite composite sketches, door-to-door inquiries, and nationwide comparisons with criminal records, the blond man was never identified. Some detectives believed he was a local who simply left Adelaide afterward. Others thought he might have been a traveler, someone passing through. Either way, he became the case's first phantom, a man who existed only in witness memories and police sketches, and then not at all. The first major suspect to emerge was Harry Phipps, a wealthy Adelaide businessman who lived near Glenelg Beach. His mansion stood less than a kilometer from where the children were last seen. Phipps was known in social circles as charming and generous, but privately, rumors surrounded him, allegations of erratic behavior, and a disturbing fascination with young children. In 2007, decades after the disappearance, his estranged son came forward, claiming that he believed his father was involved in the Beaumont case. The son described seeing 3 children near their home on the day of the disappearance and recalled his father handing money to them. It matched one of the earliest details in the case, the £1 note Jane had been seen using. Police reopened the file. Investigators examined the former Castalloy factory site, an industrial property once owned by Phipps. Ground-penetrating radar detected unusual soil patterns, and excavations were carried out twice, first in 2013 and again in 2018. Both digs revealed only construction debris and old waste material. No human remains were found. Phipps himself had died years earlier, never questioned under caution. Those who knew him described him as unpredictable, controlling, and secretive. Yet in the end, there was no evidence, only stories. The theory around him faded, leaving behind another name on an endless list. Another figure who drew investigators' attention was Derek Ernest Percy, one of Australia's most notorious convicted child killers. Percy was imprisoned for the 1969 murder of a young girl in Victoria, but police suspected him of involvement in several other unsolved child disappearances across the country. He had been in his late teens in 1966, stationed at a naval base in Adelaide during the same summer the Beaumont children vanished. Percy's crimes followed a consistent pattern: abduction of children in daylight, methodical concealment of evidence, and extreme intelligence paired with emotional detachment. These parallels unsettled investigators. If Percy had indeed been in South Australia at the time, he could have had both the means and the mindset to carry out such an abduction. But there was no confession and no direct evidence. Percy refused to discuss the Beaumont case, insisting that he couldn't remember that period of his life. Psychiatrists later described him as a man capable of murder without remorse or recall. When he died in prison in 2013, whatever secrets he held went with him. In the 1980s, the name Bevan Spencer von Einem became synonymous with horror in Adelaide. He was convicted of abducting and murdering 15-year-old Richard Kelvin, the son of a television newsreader, in 1984. Police suspected him in a string of similar crimes known as the family murders, involving the torture and killing of young men. Von Einem's profile, a manipulative, sadistic predator who lived near the Beaumont's neighborhood, led detectives to re-examine whether he could have started much earlier. Some believed the Beaumont children could have been his first victims, testing the methods he would later perfect. But the differences in victim profiles and methods were striking. Von Einem targeted teenage boys, not young children, and his crimes bore a ritualistic pattern absent in 1966. When questioned, von Einem denied any connection to the Beaumonts. Decades later, during a prison interview, he said, "That's not my work," in the detached tone that haunted those who heard it. No physical link ever tied him to the case, but his presence in the public imagination made him one of its most persistent villains. Then came Arthur Stanley Brown, an elderly man charged in 1998 for the abduction and murder of 2 young sisters in Queensland. When his photograph was released, several witnesses from the Beaumont case contacted police, saying he resembled the blond man from Glenelg. Brown had lived a life of secrecy, working as a government maintenance man with easy access to schools and playgrounds. He had also been accused decades earlier of multiple assaults that were never prosecuted. His resemblance to the 1966 composite sketch reignited media interest across Australia. But Brown was frail and confused during his trial. He was ultimately declared unfit to stand trial due to dementia. Before his death, he made no confession. Police could not prove he had ever been in South Australia in 1966. Another theory collapsed into speculation. The final name to surface prominently was James O'Neill, a convicted child killer from Tasmania. In the 1970s, O'Neill was imprisoned for the murder of a boy in the Northern Territory and later became the subject of the documentary The Fisherman. When journalists investigating his past suggested he might have been linked to the Beaumont case, O'Neill denied everything, then sued the filmmakers for defamation. His connection to the case was circumstantial at best. He had traveled widely during the 1960s and reportedly lived in South Australia for a brief period. His own statements in later interviews, vague, contradictory, sometimes taunting, only deepened suspicion. Still, as with every other suspect, no evidence placed him anywhere near Glenelg Beach that day. By the early 2000s, O'Neill's name joined the same archive of unresolved possibilities that defined the Beaumont investigation. Each of these men, real, flawed, and frightening, represented a different reflection of evil, but none could be proven guilty. For every lead, there was a missing document, a vanished witness, or a broken chain of evidence. The Beaumont investigation became a gallery of ghosts, men who might have done it, and a system that could never prove it. Decades later, one detective summed it up in a single sentence: "We had 1,000 names, and not one of them was right." By the late 1960s, the disappearance of the Beaumont children was no longer just a case file. It had become a cultural wound, a story retold in living rooms, classrooms, and newspapers for decades. Before that day, Australia saw itself as a safe, sunlit country. After it, the idea of safety itself began to erode. In the years that followed, the phrase "stranger danger" entered everyday language. Parents who had once allowed their children to walk alone to school or spend hours at the beach now kept them close. The open neighborhoods and unlocked doors of post-war Australia began to vanish. The Beaumonts' tragedy marked the end of innocence for an entire generation. The police, too, were forced to evolve. The case exposed the limitations of 1960s investigative work. No national missing children database, no central coordination between states, no modern forensic tools. After Glenelg, new procedures were developed: centralized registries, photographic records, and the early groundwork for what would become Australia's child protection policies. The disappearance of 3 siblings had changed how a nation investigated and how it feared. But it wasn't only institutions that changed, it was trust itself. Newspapers ran daily updates, often without verification. Headlines shouted new breakthroughs that evaporated within days. Some journalists began pursuing psychics or supposed witnesses just to feed the country's hunger for answers. The media turned grief into a kind of ritual, and the Beaumonts, a private family, into unwilling symbols of national loss. Television magnified the obsession. When the case was mentioned on nightly broadcasts, ratings spiked. Viewers couldn't look away from the mystery. 3 children, a crowded beach, no clues. It became a modern myth, one that each generation rediscovered, each time asking the same question: how can people simply disappear? For decades, the case lingered in Australian pop culture. Novels, documentaries, even fictional films drew inspiration from it. The very image of the Australian beach, once a symbol of joy and freedom, became tinged with unease. Parents who had grown up under the shadow of the Beaumonts would tell their own children stories about the day the country changed. And through it all, the Beaumont family withdrew from public life. Nancy and Jim rarely spoke to the press. When they did, their words were calm but devastating. "We just want to know what happened." They asked for no revenge, only for the truth. But the truth never came. Decades passed, but the Beaumont file never closed. Each new generation of investigators returned to it, armed with better tools, clearer procedures, and the same unanswered question: where are the children? The official record labeled the case open, unsolved, yet everyone involved knew what that really meant. It was a ghost file, the kind that haunts entire departments. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the case was revisited several times by South Australia police. Old evidence boxes were reopened and re-examined under improved forensic techniques. But there was little to test. No recovered clothing, no vehicles, no traceable DNA. The absence of material evidence made even the most advanced technology useless. In 2013, a breakthrough seemed possible. Detectives received information that the children might have been buried beneath a former factory site, once owned by Harry Phipps, the businessman long rumored to be involved. Ground-penetrating radar detected small disturbances in the soil. Excavations began under heavy media coverage. Television crews, helicopters, reporters broadcasting live. The world held its breath. After 2 days of digging, workers reached the precise anomaly on the radar. They found nothing, just compacted sand and layers of concrete debris from the old Castalloy factory. The disappointment was immediate and familiar. 5 years later, in 2018, a new tip led investigators back to the same location. Another scan, another excavation, another cycle of hope. Once again, no remains were discovered. Detectives later admitted that each new search risked becoming a public ritual, more symbolic than investigative. Yet they couldn't stop trying. The Beaumont case had become part of Australia's moral landscape, unfinished business that refused to fade. Meanwhile, the reward for information grew over time, eventually reaching $1 million Australian dollars. Posters, press releases, and televised appeals continued well into the 2010s, urging anyone with knowledge to come forward. A few callers did, some sincere, others delusional, but none provided verifiable evidence. Advances in forensic science gave investigators new tools: DNA profiling, digital mapping, and satellite analysis of terrain changes. But time was the enemy. Every potential sample had long decayed, every witness aged or gone. Memories blurred, archives went missing, suspects died. Even perfect technology can't resurrect what never left a trace. Today, nearly 60 years later, the case remains open. It is occasionally reviewed by specialized cold case detectives, most of whom weren't born when the children disappeared. For them, the file is a lesson, a reminder of how fragile an investigation can be when it begins with nothing. They speak of it quietly, with the kind of respect reserved for something sacred and unsolvable. In the police archives in Adelaide, the Beaumont dossier still sits on a shelf, thousands of pages thick, yellowed with age. On its spine in fading black ink, 3 names remain: Jane Beaumont, Arnna Beaumont, Grant Beaumont. The years became decades, and life inside the Beaumont house grew quieter with each passing one. The laughter that once filled its rooms was replaced by silence, a silence so heavy that even the neighbors noticed it. Nancy and Jim never moved away. They stayed in the same home, surrounded by the same reminders: 3 bedrooms frozen in time, the same wallpaper, the same toys. For them, the house had become both a shrine and a prison. In the 1970s, the family withdrew completely from public view. Journalists who tried to contact them were turned away politely, sometimes with a simple note on the door. No comment. When they did speak, it was only to correct false reports or plead for the hoaxes to stop. They never expressed anger, only exhaustion. Friends said Nancy continued to set the table for 5 people long after the children were gone. Jim returned to work, but never spoke of the case again. Their marriage, once ordinary and loving, carried the unbearable strain of unanswered grief. Eventually, they separated quietly, but neither ever left Adelaide, and both remained bound by the same question that had followed them for a lifetime. What happened to our children? In the 1990s, when police reopened the investigation yet again, Nancy gave a final statement. Her voice, recorded on tape, was steady but hollow. "I don't care who did it. I just want to know." When she passed away in 2019, she took that question with her. Jim had died years earlier, having never learned the truth either. For over half a century, the mystery they lived through defined a nation, but it never gave them peace. Today, the name Beaumont still echoes across Australia. To those who remember 1966, it means a lost era, a time when people still believed their children were safe. For younger generations, it's a story told in documentaries and school essays, a symbol of how quickly innocence can vanish. Each anniversary brings new headlines, new speculation, and the same old photographs of 3 smiling children in the summer sun. They've become timeless, not because they were found, but because they never were. 6 decades later, the sand at Glenelg Beach looks no different. Families still gather, children still laugh, the waves still erase footprints as they always have. Somewhere beneath that calm surface, the echoes remain, faint, unanswered, and eternal. Some stories never fade. They just echo. Every secret waits to be revealed. Every silence that carries an echo, every story is waiting to be told. What about yours? What do you think about this case? Share your thoughts in the comments. Every voice matters. Subscribe and step into the echoes of truth.